Blood caked Kallan's hair, gluing chunks to her battered face. What little covered her body was as shredded and black as the rest of her. Fighting to keep his arm steady, Rune slid a hand behind her head and attempted to pull back a clump of hair that had dried to her shattered eye. She breathed, but barely, and moved, jerking as if too broken to utter the screams inside. Tenderly he took her mangled hand in his, and although she turned her head to see, he doubted she saw anything at all. Biting down on his finger, Rune held back a wave of screams, biting until he tasted blood. And the rage it boiled, and the hate it consumed. Gently he laid Kallan back to the cave floor. Too near death to cry out, Kallan omitted a feeble breath he could only assume was a cry. Rune moved a hand to his hilt and raised his gaze from the shadows. The beast was up and pacing within him, despite no scythe on which to feed. 3 he saw as he made his way into the cave, 2 by the fire, 1 by the exit. With movement like water, he notched an arrow, inhaled, took aim, he released his breath, and then the arrow. In the time it took the larger of the 2 to fall back with an arrow secured in his skull, the second stood with a sick smile that viewed the beast in Rune. Before the sick one could take up his axe, Rune's bow met his face, knocking him end over end. From the exit, the largest, who Rune could only assume was the leader, shouted something that sent the sick one scrambling from the fire toward the exit. Already Rune had the next arrow notched. Inhale, breathe, release. The arrow pierced the thick of the thigh of the sick one, who screamed while the leader charged. Unsheathing his sword, Rune raised the blade and met the axe, shattering his weapon in 2. On the downswing, the Dvagar fell into the weight, and Rune brought up the broken stub, goring the leader in the gut where he left it in time to notch another arrow. He took aim and released. This one speared the sick one's spine. Howling, the sick one arched against the shaft. Before Rune could ready another arrow, a hand fell to his shoulder, and Rune met the leader's stare. The beast bellowed as lines of shadow siphoned through him. Like venom it seeped into Rune's flesh, ripped through his scythe, and tethered itself to the light stored within the beast. The shadow pulled from Rune's core, drawing out the scythe the beast had devoured. With it, Rune felt his own strength ebb. He buckled beneath the Dvagar's hand as if the leader sucked the very life from him. The bow slid from his fingers as Rune's legs slowly gave out. Still the leader maintained his hold as the shadow rose up and engulfed him. "Move!" the beast roared and thrashed. The shadow enclosed the fire and light, taking all life around it, until, upon his knees, Rune found the hilt of the daggers he had picked off Bergen. Fighting back the shadow, Rune lunged. With a dagger in each hand, he sank the blades into the leader's side. The Dvagar coughed. The stub of the sword still hung from his gut. Rune gave another shove, burying the daggers deeper into the leader's sides, until the hand slid from his shoulder, and the shadow retracted, severing the ties to the scythe. Gasping, Rune fell to his knees. Nausea accompanied the spinning room. The beast within him lay, heaving on the ground as if draining its life. Rune forced a knee up and waited for the wave of sick to pass. The sick one whimpered, and Rune looked up, still alive. The Dvagar dragged himself toward the door, his body too wounded to work. With the back of his hand, Rune wiped the sweat from his brow and found his feet under him. The sick one groaned. The distant plink of dripping water carried through the cave, as if counting down the steps to death's door. 1, 2. Rune pulled Kallan's dagger from his belt. Drip. The sick one whimpered. Rune's boots crushed the cave floor. With a hand fisted into the Dvagar's hair, Rune slid the blade across the sick one's throat, leaving the sickly smile forever frozen in his eyes. Distant roars of the giants merged with the howling winds as Rune's breath punched the cold night air, forming puffs of cloud in the storm. Specks of snow obstructed his view. He afforded a glance to Kallan. Unconscious, she hung limp in his arms, as she swayed with each step that crunched through the thin slate of ice on the snow. Her swollen eyes and broken nose distorted her face. The rags she wore did little to cover most of her, leaving her dangerously exposed to the elements. Over sheets of sleet and snow, the cold burned his lungs, adding a chill he feared that would stay with him for days. He attempted to alternate breathing from his nose to his mouth, but the cold coated his insides, freezing his air passages as the snow swallowed his skins. The wind sliced Rune's arms as if the snowflakes were blades. Desperate to shield her from the storm, he hugged Kallan tighter. The wind screamed, and with a start, Rune stumbled, mistaking the shriek of the wind for memories he heard in his head. The sickly one, crawling from the door who'd never made it. The blood still covered Rune's hands. He hadn't bothered wiping it off. There had been no time. Rune tightened his hold on Kallan, hugging her closer to his own thin tunic, in hopes of shielding her from the storm. She wouldn't survive the cold. He narrowed his eyes against the sharp sting of the snow, but saw nothing for miles but black. Liasifa! The command cut through the wind, stopping Rune in the snow. Slowly he turned back toward the cave where he had just emerged carrying the Dokafa's queen. Tall and pale and buried beneath a mesh of beard, alone Devargar stood. His large leather overcoat fell to his knees, where it settled onto the surface of the snow. Rune's heart pounded his chest, increasing the amount of breaths he drew as he calculated the distance between he and the Devargar. Kallan's dagger hung out of reach at his waist. "I'm not here for you!" Devargar spoke over the screaming wind that forced him to push out every breath against the gale. "I'm here for her." Rune tightened his hold onto Kallan. "I can kill you, just as," Rune said. "She'll die up here just like that." The Devargar shouted over Rune's threat. "Based on her condition," Rune said, "I doubt very much you care." The storm was worsening, but neither moved. "Here," the Devargar said, and extended a large bundle wrapped in leather. The wind cut the air between them, filling that space with groans. Rune looked over him. The Devargar could be hiding anything within the folds of the overcoat. "If I was going to kill you," the Devargar said, "I would have done so when your back was turned." Without the luxury to stand in the cold and weigh his options, Rune decided to move. With long, cautious strides, he closed the space between them, stopping just out of sword's reach. The bundle hit the snow with a muffled slump, and the Devargar shifted his arm, startling Rune into retreat. Cursing himself for being so foolish, Rune moved to run, but before he could take a step, the Devargar pulled off his large black overcoat lined with thick black fur and dropped it over Kallan's near-naked frozen body. With a second flourish, the Devargar brandished a sword, sheath and all, silver filigree and black opals, the largest of which was a pommel encrusted a black Aldine steel hilt. The retracted light reflected off the snow, adding a magnificent shimmer, the likes of which Rune had never seen before. "I'll start them on the roads toward Vestfold," the Devargar said. The warning pulled Rune's ear. "I'll keep them there for as long as I can. That should clear the southern roads to Viken for you." Rune forced his gaze from the sword and studied the deep black of the Devargar's eyes. So much like Bergen's, he thought. "Please," the Devargar said. "Keep her alive." Waves of relief and gratitude filled Rune, mingling with a hatred that boiled over at the sight of Kallan's condition. Before Rune could spit in his eye or thank him, the Devargar placed the sword on Kallan, and without coat or weapon, the Devargar backed away several paces, then turned. In silence he vanished into the darkness, leaving the bundle where it lay in the mountain snow.